Good evening, everybody. I hope you're sitting comfortably, as I used to say in radio many years ago. My name is Griselda Pollock, and I have the extreme pleasure of introducing tonight's event at the Tetley. I cannot say how deeply pleasured I am and how excited I am about this evening. My first pleasure is to welcome our visitor, Linsey Young, curator of contemporary art from Tate Britain, to the Tetley and to Leeds for this evening's conversation. Linsey has graciously agreed to review and engage with the works of some of the artists who have been awarded a bursary by the PANIC network in order to create art. And this has just been in the last year. So PANIC is a project that I've set up with the Tetley in order to address two things. One is we've been in and we don't know when we're going to be out in this extraordinary experience of living through a pandemic. And I got interested in, when I look back at the Spanish flu, which lasted also 2 years from 1918 to 1920, what remained of it? Did artists write about it? Did poets make poems about it? Did people sing about it? Were there films made about it? Was there any literature related out it? So how did this very extraordinary experience get recorded? And I would like to was trying to foster that artists might reflect on this experience, but at the same time, the urgency in a pandemic for artists was enormous. The precarity, the sudden loss of certain kinds of jobs, the whole kind of array of psychological, physical, social, personal, health issues that we have lived through needed some kind of support. So I approached the Tetley to create a network to mentor and develop emerging artists in the region and to address this kind of precarious and challenging conditions that emerging artists face, and to foster the creation of work which might reflect upon our situation. But of course, our situation only aggravates and develops all sorts of other conditions which our network, our group of artists are also addressing in a society that is riven with divisions that are created by differences in kind of class and wealth, questions of the treatment and experiences of people of varied capacities, the structural racism of our society, the patriarchies, and the differences between our regions and our cities, and the generations of neglect and the lack of support of our social services. These are very real and they are ongoing, but are related to and aggravated in the conditions we have. But how is it that we will remember the future of 2020 to 22? So we are many experiences that have come up and been discussed during the pandemic about loss, anxiety, lack of social experience, confinement, issues for our mental health. And these entwine, as I say, with the continuing struggles for social justice in our society. Now, PANIC stands for promoting an artist network in the crisis, but also promoting an artist network in the city region of Leeds. It's led by artists, a steering group of artists who are supported by artist advisors who are also artists or work in curation and development, and also by the wonderful team at the Tetley, the director Bryony Bond, the curator Georgia Taylor Aguilar, the coordinator of the PANIC project, Bella Probin, the technical digital coordinator, Jenny Hanley, and a whole array of people behind that. So I thank them so much for making this a reality. Now let me introduce Linsey for a moment. Now Linsey hails from Edinburgh, as you'll understand, which has got this exquisite Edinburgh accent, which is quite different from the Glaswegian. We have to remember that things, and she's had a stellar career, studying first literature, then gender and film studies, and finally history of art, before going on and doing an MA in art gallery museum studies at Manchester. She has risen and brought her wonderful skills and vision to the art world by working as a curator both in Scotland and in a variety of institutions in England, and now plays a critical role at the Tate Britain as the curator of contemporary art. And also she is the lead curator for the Turner Prize. Turn my piece of paper around because that's it. Now, one of the things I was very struck by this, Linsey, was that you were one of the first people to curate an exhibition of Claude Cahun and Marcel and Marianne Moore. Not Mary Moore, Marcel Moore. These two artists, such a wonderful collaboration from the 1930s and 40s, who were a queer partnership and queer creators, and very, very courageous anti-fascists in the war period. You have also created a number of commissions, one-person commissions, particularly Rachel Whiteread and Anthea Hamilton stood out for me. But I'm very fascinated in your commitment also to artist development in terms of your independent projects with your young team. You're working essentially with artists on the outside of the big institutions, but where we foster and develop the future. Her interest lies in queer practices and art since the 1970s, and particularly also feminist practices, where art is a site of resistance and transformation. So she seemed to be the perfect person to engage with 4 of the artists that we're going to be in discussion with tonight: Abdullah, Kevin, Alabama13, and Thahmina, who won bursaries in our first 2 rounds. There will be a talk for about 45-50 minutes, because I'm taking time up here for my introduction. And then there'll be a chance for you to pose questions, which you can put up in the Q&A section. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A. If you post your questions, I will be reading them as we go along and collecting them together and posing them either to the artist or to Linsey at the end. So enough is enough. Welcome, Linsey, to Leeds. And thank you so, so much for taking the time to do this, to study these works and talk about them. And welcome to our 4 bursary artists who will be now coming forward and visible while I go to be invisible. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Griselda. That was like a little, this is your life. That was fabulous. I appreciated it very much. And I was also going to say thank you to the whole Tetley team, just because they've been incredibly helpful in delivering this, but also it's very clear the impact that they've had on the artists from watching all the films and from just getting a sense of how supported they've been. I think that's an important thing to say. So yes, I'm thrilled to be doing this because there's nothing better in my job than meeting new artists and seeing work I didn't know about, especially work outside of London, which is sometimes, and especially at the moment, harder to get to. So it's really wonderful. And to start, I wanted to kind of read the brief that the artists were given to give us a little bit of context. So they were given the statement: in our times, new, strange, dark, difficult, challenging, sad, interesting, unforeseen, unimagined. This pandemic has changed everyone's lives and created new experiences, pressures, and possibilities. We are asking artists to create new works that helps us think through these new psychological, social, and cultural conditions. We are hoping that the bursaries will offer spaces to create a voice. We are also encouraging artists to think deeply about issues and lived experiences of race, class, disability, gender, and sexuality. And we're hoping to explore experience of situated, self-reflexive diversity among the creative communities of Leeds. So, so far, actually, it might be more now, but the first 2 rounds, there were 9 artists awarded bursaries. And I was invited to spend time with all of the submissions, which are online and which everyone can look at, and reflect on that work and think about how I might want to review it with everyone here. And I thought no one needs me rattling on for an hour. So I thought it'd be brilliant to get artists in conversation and hear them talking about their work directly. So I selected 4 artists for us to talk about or talk with today. All of the submissions were brilliant, and they're all online, as I said. So we've put their names at a slide at the end so that you can see the kind of broader context as well. But the 4 artists here tonight are Abdullah Adekola, Alabama13, Kevin Devonport, and Thahmina Begum. And looking at their work, it struck me that all 4 artists were exploring long-standing issues of oppression, trauma, care, violence, things that have perhaps only recently been cracked open and become more visible because of our experiences of the pandemic. And the way, I think Griselda talked about this beautifully earlier, that the pandemic has shown the strains on care systems, the impacts of institutional racism, effects of poverty more acutely, not for the people who experience them, they're always acute, but for a kind of national consciousness. It feels like certainly at the beginning, there was a moment where people were really looking and thinking about their neighbors and their friends. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about each artist so I don't take up too much time. And then I'll pose my first question. So Abdullah Adekola. Abdullah is a Black British working class writer and performer whose work is focused on decolonization and explorations of masculinity and mental health. And for PANIC, he has made his first film work that features a performative collaboration with Thai Oganyinka and Alia Adekola. Alia Adekola. And the work looks at the Black history of Leeds and the positive and negative experiences of life in the city for people of colour. And then we have alabamathireteen, who is a disabled working class visual artist who is largely self-taught and whose practice centres around her experiences of living with disability. And for PANIC, she made a triptych of films, turning her bedroom into a camera obscura and really taking the outside in, quite extraordinary piece of work. The work combines moving and static imagery and draws our attention to the isolation of the individual during the pandemic, but also more widely for people for whom physical restriction and isolation is an ongoing experience that will continue after the pandemic. And Kevin Devonport, I got that wrong earlier, Devon like the place, is a self-taught painter who's interested in people's attachment to material goods and who learned to paint while in prison. And for the bursary developed a painting, really exquisite single painting that defines this moment for him. And the work is about the pandemic, but it's also about its wider context and the implications it opens up around Kevin's interest in sociology and people's attachment and relationship and the way that they move through the world. And then Thahmina Begum is an artist and trainee art psychotherapist, and her commission is very different in form again, and took the form of 9 creative laboratories with 3 different generational groups in Leeds. And they were Bangladeshi groups. So the aim was to, through intergenerational voices, talk about lived experiences of racism. And the presentation online is this beautiful film where the kind of narration of, I'd imagine a few of these events is cut together over photographs of the women who were making artwork during workshops. And so I titled this event, the slide that you would have seen at the beginning, after a line from Abdullah's poem, which is, "Why do we live our lives like all this stuff survives?" And I thought that really beautifully reflects this very intense moment that we've lived through together, where for the vast majority of us, and for a very huge kind of range of reasons, I think a lot of us have changed the way we think about the future, about our health, about our civil liberties, our access to communities. And I think perhaps we realise now that under pressure, perhaps not so much of what we used to think was important is important, and indeed maybe should survive going forward. And within all 4 of these artists' work, I sensed really radical interests. Maybe that's because I'm always looking for them, but I think they're quite close to the surface, and perhaps even propositions for how we might live in a less individualistic and capitalist community. And I'd like to start off with a question for everyone, thinking about, what do you want to take forward from the pandemic? And maybe wrap within that, how, if at all, have your practices and your perspectives on your artistic lives changed?
I'm happy to go. So what would I like to take forward from the pandemic? I think it's really helped focus on what's important. So I'm describing myself as an early career artist or writer, and I realized that I realized again that life is precious, and life is it can be short, and you need to spend time doing things that matter to you. So being on this platform and amongst these other artists and writers, and especially who are kind of experiencing the pandemic at the same time, and who are also either at various stages in their art journey, it's been a pleasure, and it's been a very useful thing, and a very necessary thing. And I'm thankful that I made some start before, you know, the pandemic hit, in terms of writing and creating, so that it was a matter of like kind of adjusting rather than starting from scratch, really. And yeah, so that's one thing I would take. I'll, we talked about walking. I mean, I'd never heard of walking before lockdown, and now I'm a big, a big advocate and a partake in it. And so many things that, going to things by yourself, which is, I would have been socially conscious to do. Telling, not having a plan in terms of you're not seeing friends, you're not dating anyone, you're not, etc. Going to things by yourself and being by yourself. When you're in a good mood, that'll be my caveat. Being by yourself is, if you're in a good mood already, being by yourself it can be very good if you're deliberately doing it. If you're already lonely and low, then being by yourself doesn't really help. And I've experienced both. So walking and then also making the time, and then being able to make the time to do more art because of working from home, etc. It's been an appreciation of things that are important for me.
Thahmina, I can see you coming in there.
Yeah, just to follow on from Abdullah, I think for me, the biggest thing I want to take from the pandemic is just to be radically brave. And I think this PANIC project was the catalyst for me personally. Coming out of art college, and the things that you learn from art college, it's a very Eurocentric view, from the literature to the artists you studied, nothing relatable to me. And I found it a struggle when I came out to think this is what art should be, never really finding my identity in terms of what I should be. Should I do my lived experience things? I don't want to be pigeonholed, but actually when this PANIC bursary came out, a friend of mine sent it, and I've been a year into my art therapy course, and I was so buzzing with everything that I learned, and almost I wanted to put the literature and the academic into practice. I already knew it from the years and years of working in health inequalities, but just to marry the art and health together was for me just to see if it was working. And also my project was around racial trauma, so I was just sick and tired of people talking about Black Lives Matter. I wanted to do something. I wanted to put something in action, not only just to talk about it, but provide a space to get some healing for people that are really affected. Because, the biggest thing I think as you can give psychologically to a person is a safe space. And that's what this project, for me personally, I didn't realize the power that it would give. The things that came out from my project over the generations, many things of racial trauma just haven't changed, and there's things that are new that have come up. But the thing that really struck a chord with me was the intergenerational trauma, or the ancestral trauma that we hold in our bodies, people of colour, that just wasn't talked about, it wasn't felt. And this was a platform that allowed not only myself, because I didn't realise how mentally and emotionally it affected me, and the great photographer Marina, who's of Armenian background, it affected was like a can of worms that just opened out, that you just didn't know what was coming out. I mean, I remember one of the older generation, she held that racial trauma in for about 40 years, and even when I said it's a safe space to talk about it, she still thought that she was going to get arrested for talking about racism. You know what I mean? And there were so many positives that came out of it, but I think the biggest thing was having a platform to be brave and speak about things in a really, really safe manner.
Kevin.
I think you made a good point when you said the pandemic highlights a lot of social issues. I'd say it's exacerbated problems. Like, for instance, I'm quite pessimistic before the pandemic with consumer culture, because we're heading in just one direction for a crash collision, because we just create products to throw away. It's a wasteful society. Capitalism, it has to generate waste to survive, but we've got a planet that's got a finite amount of resources which we're just completely using faster and faster. And I've grown up, I'm showing my age now, I've grown up through like deindustrialisation. I saw neoliberal policies come in full throttle, and then just saw how communities brought down. So my family originated from a mining community, and you just see now all communities got destroyed and then drug ravished, and the individualisation where society's becoming more atomised. The pandemic's just exacerbated it. So social isolation, it was like a neoliberal disease. It fits perfectly with all the problems it was causing. I think, sorry, probably when you're looking at that in terms of a bit more optimist, when you look, you know, in from the future, this is probably the best time in history to be an artist with everything that's happening. You know, there's no more better time because there's so many like subject matters to highlight. But I think we're at a real pinnacle of humanity where we're going to be at a tipping point, you know, where everything's going to be over. But it's like I've spoken about, I'm a long-term optimist. I don't think we'll pull through it. We'll get it. We're going to really face some bad situations, but I think we'll learn from that.
There was a point in your film, just super quickly, there was a point in your film, Kevin, that I loved where you said, why do artists keep having to make new things? Everything goes in circles. And I love that was brilliant.
Well, do you know, like I like traditional art forms, like the vanitas, you know, the early paintings. It's noticed I do a lot of still life, and I like to speak with objects. So that was a bit of an influence for me, because before I really got into art and new things, it must have been something in my blood. Because I used to just love walking around art galleries. Never could know I could do it myself, but there was something there, and I used to like look at these paintings and think, wow. And then when I started learning more about it, that you can actually read a painting like a book. And that's one of the things that I've used tarot a lot in my paintings, you know, how we can read the cards. I like that with reading with visual objects.
Alabama, what are your reflections on that first question? And then I'll...
for me, one of the probably far more negative than anything the rest of the artists have said, but one of the things that stood out most to me at the beginning of the pandemic was how accessibility to work, to be, you know, to social life, to being able to be an artist, to all, you know, all sorts of barriers that disabled people faced. That, you know, we were constantly being told, no, we can't accommodate these things. It's too expensive. It's too difficult. Suddenly, when you find everyone has to stay at home, like magic, these things appear. And whilst it's, you know, it's great, and it for me personally, it did mean that it was much like my art career, I guess. Again, I'm like a very early career artist despite being quite old, which probably has to do with, you know, having been, you know, being disabled, having been a single parent, all the kind of things that place a barrier for you if you can't take a traditional route into art. It opened things up for me. I was able to establish sort of even, you know, just talk to people over Zoom, because with my I have a medically suppressed immune system, which means that even when there isn't a pandemic, people and their germs are not the best for me, let's put it that way. So I do spend a lot of time in my house, very isolated, and trying to become an artist in those kind of circumstances is quite difficult. But yeah, so it was amazing to see how, when, you know, sort of like relating to what Kevin said, that when capitalism needs something, capitalism can magically make it appear. When it's a minority of people, or people who under a capitalist system where, you know, we're valued by our worth is based on what we can contribute in terms of the economy, a lot of disabled people aren't valued under that. And, you know, we're made to feel like we're a drain on society, despite the fact that the pandemic should have highlighted a lot of disabled people have jobs and families and social lives, and also the ones that don't aren't, you know, we're still all equal, and we should all be treated equally. You know, we shouldn't that concept of like only valuing people for what, you know, they can sort of economically provide to society, and the, you know, again what Kev was saying about, you know, the very individualistic nature of a capitalist society, and communities are being eroded kind of thing, makes it very hard to make those connections. And I think for me, what I'll take sort of what it's meant for my art is it has created more opportunities, but I kind of fear that, you know, people talk about going back to normal, and like normal never existed for me and for lots of other people. And this could have been a great opportunity to look into that further. You know, when people were being asked to work from home, it's like there's a difference between, you know, telling someone suddenly like, right, you work from home now, and actually creating a supportive structure and environment for people to be able to do that provides more accessibility for everyone ultimately. So yeah.
I think that's brilliant. That's like the meaty stuff that I was hoping we'd get to, but really quickly. And I think that was something that struck me, like when the pandemic hit, my mum was dying, and we were involved in the care system and actually working with art therapists. So I was really interested in that kind of aspect of your work, Thahmina. But she'd been ill for a long time with something else, and I was very aware of the healthcare system and very aware of how hard it is to access things when you're at home or you're looking after someone else. And a very good friend of mine works with neurodivergent artists in Edinburgh, and she said the same. She called me up and she was like, I'm so angry because we have all of this money and we've never had any money and no one's ever cared, and now I have so much work. And obviously she was delighted and it was brilliant, but it was so infuriating that these incredible artists that they'd struggled to get funding for decades, overnight it was all there. And as you say, you're immediately on Zoom and, you know, everything opens up. And kind of one thing that I was hoping we would get to is thinking about, like, I work in a national institution with all of the brilliant things and all of the terrible things that can mean for access and, you know, the like. But it strikes me, and when I was kind of doing all this research on your work, looking at what the Tetley have done, they've done such an incredible job on making everything accessible online really well, you know, in terms of captioning and all those kind of different things. And I started to wonder, and again, being Scottish, I've had a lot of work in regional galleries as well, and kind of understanding the power struggles between different areas. And I kind of wondered, as a young-ish artist, as emergent artists in Leeds, coming with these very political stances, how do you see the art world? Because it's so, it can be seen as something very glamorous and shiny, and it's all like Frieze Art Fair and the Turner Prize and all that kind of stuff. But like, how do you imagine your place in it? What would you like? What would your aspiration be for that? And I think also, or maybe a different question is, how can a museum or a gallery work post-pandemic? Like, what do we need to learn to make things better for artists?
I'm happy to go. So I am a full-time, I work full-time. I work in adult social care, or I work in a mental health charity. So those things inform my work either on a very on the nose way, or maybe just in a less, just in a more subtle way. I'm also Black, so in terms of the pandemic, it brought to the fore, anti-racist uprisings and things like that. So in terms of, Kevin talked about being optimistic and also being pessimistic. I think for me, an important thing, I'll get to your question, Linsey. I think the important thing is that balance of like destroying and then building. I think it's really important. I don't think there's enough on the destroying side, which to me is like that critical analysis of the situation that we are in terms of, climate, in terms of colonialism, in terms of just simple working class, but just so many things. I really, I think there needs to be more of that. but you know, of course, people have to work. They have, and you know, it can be, yeah, it can be kind of difficult to kind of just to articulate the realities that we live in, let alone then critique them and then also offer something. But so I think it's important to kind of critique what the situation is, which is there's a lot to critique. But I think also it's important to offer some in that building, so which is like, you know, offering that what's unique to you, what's unique to your culture, your cultures, your community, whether it's your faith, whether it's just your personality, and that's when things like, you know, being neurodivergent or just looking at the world in a slightly different way, these are all to me, these are all on the building side. So even though, and I reflect all the time, you know, I have a brother, we have similar DNA, but our personalities are different. And so that means that, you know, just because we're working class artists, we don't always look at things the same. Just because we're Black artists, we don't always look at things the same way. And I think it's important to kind of, for the individual artists, right, to remember that, and also for the audience as well, to remember that just because you've kind of feel like, okay, we've ticked the box of a disabled person, we've ticked the box of a Black person, you haven't really, you haven't really done, you know, as much as you think you've done. And then in terms of, so I'm a bit, you might see that I call myself a writer more often, because I feel that's, I've not had any art education. I've only in the past few years started going to art galleries, so I'm a little bit intimidated by it, especially like visual art, because obviously how we were taught, that's what proper art is. But of course now that, but with people like, with hanging out with other working class creatives, like, you know, working class creative database and people like the White Cube, and just people who are like, have a kind of similar outlook, a similar mindset, they're kind of giving you, they're exploring and they're giving you the language to, you know, talk about art and talk about art institutions and the pros and cons of them. And it helps you to kind of get more familiar with it. And of course, you know, I think television is good art, I think music is good art. And so I think art can be accessible to, you know, what got us through the pandemic was, you know, BBC, iPlayer, Netflix, etc. So, you know, that's art as well. So I think just more initiatives like that, where more places where like people in communities can feel like they can, like I go to a local book club where they show art there. So I think putting it in front of people and putting it in spaces where people are going to go, I think that will help to kind of make it more accessible, make it more in the discussed. Yeah, that's what I think. I really like. I think that obviously, yeah, people need to be more curious and take risks, but I think also that, you know, why can't Leeds City Libraries or Leeds City Art Gallery, why can't they go on tour? Why can't they kind of go to the people and then see how people engage in a different way?
I agree so much with what you've just said. One of the terms that annoys me so much when you hear galleries and other art institutions talk about their audiences is when they say people are hard to reach, and they like put that emphasis onto those individuals being the problem. And it's like, actually take some time to be self-reflective as an organization. You put the, you know, essentially you're being paid to do that job. Don't put the responsibility, you know, onto those individuals. You know, take some time and really, you know, put some work into it, and don't expect that people, you know, if you don't take time to build relationships and, you know, for people to be able to feel welcome into spaces, then they're not going to. You know, that just isn't going to happen. And it is very much, you can't rely on that sort of tokenism, which I think Abdullah was referring to as well. It's like, I always say, it's like disability isn't a monolith. It's like there are all sorts of different access needs. Accessibility, you know, if you understand my accessibility needs, then you understand my accessibility needs. You know, there isn't some kind of like list there that you can just tick off. And often, you know, disabled people, neurodivergent artists, we can have quite conflicting access needs, all within that space. And, you know, that doesn't just apply to disability. And it's like, and it, you know, how it's putting the time and effort into actually looking into, you know, exploring that more with people. Also, you know, not just thinking that, oh, well, there's wheelchair accessibility into this building, so therefore we are accessible. It's like that, you know, I nearly swore then, sorry. But, you know, that's just not true. And accessibility is not just about wheelchairs. You know, there's also, like, working class people feel like, you know, I always say, it's like I consider myself an artist. I found it really hard to start calling myself an artist, but I do. But there's still institutions within the city that I have lived, you know, like I was born in Leeds, I've lived most of my life in Leeds, and I feel completely intimidated going into them. And it's like, how can that be right? It's like, you're not creating institutions that are for the community in which you're based. If there's you know, a group of people, if there's a lot of us that feel like, you know, like when you were young, you go in a shop and they think you're shoplifting, follow you around, and that's what it feels like.
But I guess that's kind of my point. It's like, post-pandemic, are galleries even relevant anymore? Like, if you can do amazing projects like this remotely, like, what do you, as kind of emergent artists, do you think about working in different, I'm not supposed to, because you're emergent, it's all new, but like, they seem to be different modes of working. And it reminded me of like in the 70s, when feminist artists would have exhibitions in libraries and community centres, because no museums would give them any attention, so they had to go to the places that would. And actually, looking back, that's the work I find most interesting, because like, they would often laminate things so that they could be posted around, and the aura of the kind of single artwork was dismantled, so that there was just a greater degree of access. And maybe it's not a good question, but I suppose thinking about, how you emerge, and does that mean making exhibitions in galleries, or does that mean doing these incredible art therapy sessions with a group of intergenerational people?
I was going to say, I think if anything, the pandemic has taught us certain structures and systems and museums and galleries just don't cater for, you know, everybody. And I think that's taught us that, you know, when I brought the groups down to Tetley, which is where I held the creative labs, we live in Beeston, 5 minutes away from the Tetley. Nobody had been to the Tetley, and they thought it cost money, that they didn't belong there, they didn't look right to go in there, they felt really, really intimidated by it. But when we'd finished the creative labs, Georgia really kindly showed us around, and they just loved the art, and everybody had a connection to something or another. So it just went to show that if you make it safe for people to come, then, you know, people will come. And it goes back to, I think everything goes back to Kevin's point of it being a Western, individual, capitalist state. At the end of the day, we're coming out of a pandemic, hopefully, where nationally we're grieving. We've had a national trauma, so we should be having collective healing, but that's not going to happen. And I think that's why it was so important for me, when we talk about racial trauma, my particular project, I did it as a group. I did it as a group so people recognise what was going on with them, because when somebody said something, oh, that happened to me, you can make them instant connections, what was going on, rather than holding everything inside your body and keeping it, and then that detrimenting your health, which is what's going to happen if we don't think carefully. And I think personally, it's something that I've been banging on about, is that our institutions really need to change their way of thinking on what can be placed there, and what I would love art therapy sessions at the Tetley Gallery. Just putting it out there, Griselda. But, you know, like, why shouldn't there be places of healing? And if anything, you know, art is such a medium of, you know, especially people of colour, where I knew if I walked into a room and I said, come on, guys, let's talk about racism, nobody would even give me eye contact. But having that medium of art where they didn't need to give me eye contact, they could work together, then that was part of the healing. And, you know, not just leaving people open to continue having that trauma in their bodies. And I think the pandemic needs collective action. It needs social action. And I think one thing that I've realised my own self is that I don't need to make Western art. I need to do with my lived experience, and I need to chat about things that are important to me and the communities I live in. And I don't care if I'm pigeonholed, because it's what I feel passionate about, and it's what is real, and what is happening now. And I think we can, with art, we've got such a powerful tool to actually do things that we won't get arrested for in the normal day. So, you know, like, I think we are in a really powerful position, but it's how we nurture that, and having curators like yourself, and, you know, where people are almost dismantling the power as well, because it's not equal. There's no equity going on. And, you know, if you haven't got a seat at the table, which is one of the images that I made in my project, how are you ever going to get there? If there's not a seat there for you, and you're only getting biscuit crumbs, then you're never going to walk in them doors. Sorry, I'm going off in a bit.
No, it's wonderful. And like, one of the things I find really shocking about your work was, I was listening, and then a lady starts talking about 7/7, and I was like, oh, hang on, we're talking about the pandemic. And it was this extreme privilege that I have as a white woman to never really think about that event, you know, of course, to feel empathy for the people who are harmed by it, and I just thought, my God, and thinking about the time frame, which is something Griselda touched on earlier, like, what is the time frame of a pandemic? What is the time frame of trauma? Like, how you feel things going back to normal very quickly, and it can feel very destabilizing, because actually you've been in a space where perhaps we've been allowed to talk more about our emotions, or we've been allowed to say, no, I'm not going to take on that work, or I'm going to do it on Zoom, or I'm going to do those things. And then this kind of speeding up is quite scary. And I also sort of want to nudge Kevin to talk a wee bit as well. And maybe time and duration is something you're well equipped to talk about in your practice, both in terms of experience, but also mark making. It must take a long time to make your works, as well as.
I completely agree with points that Michelle and Thahmina made there about it can be intimidating, especially if you come from, we've all usually come from council estates, and especially like from my age group back then. Things are changing slowly, but it was like, this is not for you. And even like I said earlier, where I had an interest in art, but I'd never had the opportunity to explore it. It's not while going to prison that I actually, you know, like, even then, just going into an art class was so intimidating for me. I remember that I'd look through the window and I didn't have the bottle to go in there. You know, it's just, more or less how it was. I was forced in there. But a good thing as a
Very good thing.
Yeah, a good thing is like someone like myself as a prisoner. You get that label attached, your criminal label, so you become unemployable. You've got no voice whatsoever, because people just do not care about prisoners whatsoever. You know, you just look at the media and you should be beaten over the head with a stick for the rest of your life. You know, if you beat a prisoner, then it just perpetuates that criminality. Then you have nowhere to go to, and you always go back to the same things. But art with me, it's giving me that platform, and I can put these like points out to people. And like, just look when I say things are changing slowly, I look at this group here, we're all diverse. You know what I mean? And sometimes the society we look at, we concentrate too much on diversity rather than the bridges that gap diverse groups. And art's like that. It's like a social glue. That's what's brought us all here together. That's what should be like expanded more to, you know, like council estates, and, you know, people saying, yeah, it is for you, it's for everybody.
I just wanted to add in, I think the discussion about power dynamics is like really important. I actually think that you know, art can be in galleries, art should be in all sorts of spaces. And I think that that's really important. As a disabled artist, one thing that can happen sometimes is people presume your art is always community art because you're disabled. And so there's a lot of disabled artists who actually really aspire to getting into gallery spaces, you know, to ensure that there's a different range of stories being presented, you know, that there's a richness to the stories that are being presented to the public within those gallery spaces. And, you know, I don't think that we should abolish galleries. What I think that we need to do is address that hierarchy of power that exists within art, and that, you know, if your work is in this place, then your work is the best work. If your work is in this space, then it's not quite as good. You know, it's like the same kind of, you know, hierarchy of power that exists that always prioritizes the visual art over all, you know, all other forms of art. And I think what would be great to come from this, and the fact that, you know, like funding bodies are trying to focus more on, you know, making sure that the places that they're funding are more inclusive and accessible. It would be good if some of that was less just surface and more about like actually breaking down some of those hierarchies of power, and definitely, you know, making sure that people have a seat at the table, not just a seat at the table, but a voice in the seat at the table. And, you know, you're not just there to add that team diversity to the photos or whatever.
I think it's really exciting as well that Abdullah mentioned them earlier, about having people like the White Pube who are completely transforming the way that people feel they're able to talk about historical, the historical structures, and it's so exciting. And yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, just to say that I find it really kind of threatening and brilliant and exciting to have those voices on the sideline kind of going, no, that's not good enough, or, you know, you need to try harder, or what if it was done like this? Yeah,
it's like challenging the art speak. And, you know, it's like if people feel they can talk about the art they see in a way that they would talk just normally, and not, you know, it's that using big words to intimidate people, just, you know, it's just annoying and unnecessary.
Sorry, I'm just getting yeah, and I guess one of the other things I was wondering about is, who do we think maybe, who or what isn't being recognized? So this is like this moment where there's a spotlight that has been shone on the care system and structures like that, but are there people we still aren't paying enough attention to? Are there people, artists, topics you're looking at that still need support? That might be too vague.
I think there's so we're all English speakers to a very proficient degree. So that's something. I think there's something about people like refugees and migrants. I feel like they're not recognized enough in our society. They're not given the respect that they deserve. And you know, Kevin talked about, you know, prisoners, and I don't know if, and I would fully agree. I think, you know, there's an element that sometimes when we look at people as if that they're one thing, or that they should be written off because of, you know, what maybe things they've done. You know, homeless people as well. You know, I think, you know, people about homeless people. I think, you know, the fact that, you know, there's, you know, if you speak to homeless people, they'll tell you that, you know, people will actually go out to actually harm them and, you know, set fire to their tents, things like that. So I think those kind of sentiments need to be rejected and need to be, and, you know, a better way needs to be shown. But yeah, I think you know, someone said that, you know, philosophy is locked by language. So I think if you can afford the time to really look at, okay, how you want to expand your mind and expand opportunities, then, you know, you have to look at the limitations of language, and you know, and look at, okay, getting people whoever English is not their first language, or who come from a refugee backgrounds or immigrant backgrounds, to actually be involved. I also want to say something as well, which is about faith and spirituality. Now I'm kind of, you know, have my own personal relationship with that. But I think in polite society or in art spaces, even though they're more liberal and more progressive than a lot of other spaces, like than, let's say, a corporate space, I still think there's more that can be done in terms of welcoming people. So, you know, and it's not just about kind of, you know, it's not just about like, it includes everything from like, you know, the venues that art things and art socials have, to just the understanding of different people's backgrounds, different people's experiences. I think yeah, I think more can be done in that regard. So yeah, so that's what I would say. I'd say migrants and refugees and people from yeah, different faiths. And it's not necessarily just about, it's about engaging with it in a way that it's not just where you feel like you can actually discuss, you can actually challenge, you can discuss, but you only do that because you have some understanding and some awareness. Where I think that sometimes in lieu of discussions and engagements and even you know, criticism or critique even, there's just a kind of ignoring. So I think that that's something that potentially could engage more people, because, you know, that's something that's important to a lot of people.
I wonder, oh, sorry, Thahmina, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I don't think it's about finding new groups or new people to work with. I think it's anybody who is a minority in this country and not classed as the mass, you know, the norm is classed as a minority. And it's not about finding new groups that we can have a tick list, in my opinion. It's about supporting the groups that you're working with, so you build up leadership and you build up the confidence of people like us on this panel, so we can, you know, work with the next generation or work with our grassroots communities and groups, so we can build on that. And I just wanted to, I think Abdullah talked about religion and stuff, and I think the thing from my project, what I really highlighted is that more sometimes in the race issue was the issue of religion and how their religion has been weaponized in Western media. So that was a really big trauma for them. But going back to Black Lives Matter, you know, and if we go back to that ancestral trauma of even the slave trade, what we have now in modern 2021 with the pandemic is that we're still enslaved with our mouths, because we still cannot fully express our views and opinions, because we all always have to hold back, because until then therefore not be our true selves. And I think that's an area to work with, not just on the surface level, but really dig deep in, you know, understanding these communities. So I come from South Asian community, and there's so many stigmatizations within, you know, the mental and emotional well-being, you know, keeping things in the family, silence is golden, all these like little nuances. And if curators and exhibition space really worked hard to dig deeper, I think there's such a rich body of work to be developed and explored.
And thank you so much for making sense of a really badly worded question on my part. I really appreciate that. And I wonder, because we've got about 6 minutes left of this part, and I wondered if maybe each of you could tell me what you're planning on working on next, if you know what it is, just kind of giving the audience a little bit of a taster about what they can look forward to with your work. And then we'll go to audience questions, if that's okay with everyone. And maybe Kevin, you could tell us what you're painting at the moment.
Yeah. My overall theme at the minute is basically an attack on consumerism. Recently, I've had a lot of people categorizing my art in the pop art, which is quite annoying, because I think it's completely different. It's contextual, because in pop art, where we've got Warhol and the other pop artists, they was praising mass production and consumerism in the context. And it's like I've said, I don't have a go at them, because that was at a time when capitalism had a lot of promise. The American dream had just come from the Second World War. Before that, there was the Depression. So it provided jobs, people had a better standard of living, and you had all these like excesses. So you can't you can understand completely why people celebrated it. And when we've gone into late modernity and late capitalism, we've seen the downside of it. breakdowns of community, individualisation. It's a dog-eat-dog world. The damage we're doing to the just with the waste. So when people have been saying pop art, I'm completely against pop art. I'll accept neo pop art because it's pop art in today's context that we are now, but more of an anti-pop artist. So that's what I'm working on at the minute. I've done a lot of my work is basically on how everything becomes a commodity. Nothing can escape this machine. It goes, anything that comes in its path. Look at the work of Banksy. He criticised, like, but it's now become part of that machine. It's engulfed him. The water that falls from the sky, the air we breathe, every single thing has become a commodity. No one can escape it. So it's just like a machine that just engulfs everything. So yeah, a lot of that is basic my topics at the minute.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was this is always a funny question, isn't it? What are you working on, what are you, etc. And I always find that, just a side note, I always find that when I go to social functions parties, I try to avoid the topic of like work and things like that, because sometimes when you say what you do for a job, that people then gauge how, people can gauge how much respect to give you or how to value you, etc. But I always like to say, oh yeah, I like to write, or I like to, etc. To answer your question, I think my goal is to specifically the project in terms about Leeds. I'm going to be doing something with the Leeds City Museum, and I'm going to do something with the Leeds City Museum, and it's actually talking about money. So there's going to be an exhibition about, I think I'm allowed to say this. So it's about, the theme is about money, and it's about like, so they're going to have a piece of, I'm going to write a poem for it. They're going to have some of it up in there, and we're also going to maybe film as well some of it, maybe do some workshops as well regarding it. So it's a very kind of obviously interesting topic. I've got a lot of feelings about this. I think I really vibe a lot with what Kevin's saying. And then generally just turning poems into films or into other media. And then I'm hoping to do some script writing and just to kind of develop that narrative side in terms of that storytelling side. And then I'm also hoping to kind of see more visual art and hopefully buy some and collect some and just get involved in that space. So that's what I'm hoping to do.
Alabama, what are you up to?
I go next. I'm working, I have a work in progress exhibition that's going to be at the Art House in Wakefield in May. So I'm developing some work for that. I'm keen to start working a lot more with film and soundscapes. And it was great to be able to have the opportunity with PANIC to start exploring that. And I have since made a few more sort of soundscape pieces. My work is going to definitely be very focused around this inside outside thing. I don't think I'm going to be able to get away from shielding for quite a long time with the way everything's going. I'm very interested in the kind of cycles of nature and how they relate to sort of like the cycles of dealing with disability and health, and times that need to be quiet and times when I have more energy and I can work, and how I can integrate that into the way I work myself and in my relationships with organizations, because I'm keen to sort of develop, when I do things, I don't like to just do them for the benefit of myself. I'm like, if I can start, the relationships that I build with organizations can have a knock-on benefit for other artists, because the way I work has to be quite cyclical. Then yeah, and I'm interested in exploring more. What I've been working on quite a lot recently as well is using plant materials to create photographs, a process called anthrotypes. Again, it's that nature thing, and I'm exploring how I'm having to start doing some stuff like around like gardening type stuff, like when things grow and all that kind of thing. So so yeah, just all sorts, mainly trying to get my head around this how you can live in a world that you can't be a part of, I guess.
Thank you. Thahmina.
Yeah, so I've got a number of projects on the go at the same time. I've just finished a project with Dr. Sculpt International as one of their associate artists, and we've just finished, so we worked with the women's group down in Easton, and part of that project was exactly what we were talking about in our earlier conversation, access and engagement. So with that, with the women's group, we took them to various museums and galleries like Leeds, York Sculpture Park, etc., because they've never accessed it, and then taking inspiration from the sculptures from these different places and then doing lots of making. So the women have created a project called Stories from a Suitcase. So it's like a giant suitcase, and it was taking inspiration from the Henry Moore, one of the exhibitors there, and hopefully we're going to exhibit it at Leeds Art Gallery, fingers crossed. And it then goes back to what Michelle said about, you know, they want to see their work, so hopefully we're going to have it in February half term, which then means that they can take their kids there, which then, you know, has that knock-on effect. And I'm very much like, the project that I get involved with is not about me, it's about communities and leaving that legacy. So they continue the work themselves. And then I'm working with Leeds 2023 as one of their artists, developing really hyper-local stories, and that's really, really good. So that project's called Saris and Street Signs, so that's a really exciting project. I really hope that everyone can come to all these. And then in the summer, I'm working with Helen Phoebe at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, part of their Summer of Love, and it's very much to do with the distribution of power and art therapy, possibly. And yeah, it's really exciting. I can't tell you too much, but I've got a meeting tomorrow.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I wanted to end with a note where everyone knows where they can find you next and they can see what you're up to, but it's all incredibly exciting. I think it's time for Griselda to appear again magically.
Good, there you are. I'm right again, Cedra. That has been such a wonderful and such a rich and very direct and personal and to the point kind of conversation about so many issues that are absolutely at the heart of the PANIC project, which is not that we're kind of creating people who can be siphoned off and rise up and then move away, etc., but actually keep the world of Leeds and the kind of the groundedness of these struggles in daily life visible to people in art, and art be the place where we explore it and also make it available. And I'm very, very struck by the questions that you've raised about hospitality, you know, the sense of how do we make art spaces hospitable and safe. So one of the first questions is particularly to Thahmina to maybe take up, but other people can do, is, you know, what are the methods that you have used with participants to develop people's confidence and what you call about this bravery to be able to speak of things and make things with what you speak of. So in the space, when in many cases there's so much fear and anxiety about the things you want to talk about. So if you could just talk very briefly about what are the sort of methods that you use, because I think if I can just say that people think of art therapy as sort of, you know, trying to make people feel better, whereas you're actually saying these are, as it were, sort of the historical, I mean, people are the carriers of historical crimes committed against them that are, and particularly, as you say, passed down from generation to generation, from things like partition, from migration, from contemporary racism. And you use that notion, Thahmina, that sort of you're carrying them in your body. There's this very sense that you're literally, you know, poisoned in a sense by the things that happen and are carried. But so what are the methods that make an environment free from fear and anxiety to be able to feel brave and do the work that you're discussing?
Yeah, just to point on the pain in the body, I remember in one of the workshops, one of the ladies, when she was talking about it, just as she was verbalizing it, it clicked into her head. She said, oh, that's why I felt angry for 3 days. I didn't know what was happening to me. It makes sense now. So, you know, the physiological aspect of, you know, trauma and racial trauma. It sticks in your body. And, you know, just like the pandemic, when we come out of it, there will be instantly smells, stories, emotions, hearing things, and it will instantly bring you back to where you've been, just as what the news is about this week, what's going on, and how we were placed back in May 2020 with racial trauma, whether it's happened to you as a child, as a young adult, it sticks with you and you can instantly put yourself back in that incident. But just digress, but in terms of methods, it was really, really important to me to build up that trust. And because I'm from the community that I deliver to, I'm really, really embedded into my community, which is very much socially and economically deprived, very much working class area. And it was about them having the trust with me. I had a set plan, and it was 3 workshops per group. And although it was planned, I very much was very flexible around the group, what was the needs of it. So with the young people and the adults, it did as a group, but with the older people, they didn't have the trust at the beginning. So it was much more a group discussion to build up that trust, build up that empathy, that this is not going anywhere. This is a really, really safe space. And I think it's about knowing your community, but building up that trust initially. And then, you know, not just opening up a can of worms, but healing. And one of the last things that I did was writing a letter to their racists, and that was really cathartic, really therapeutic. And you have to have an end goal and really, really think carefully about the people that you're working with. And I really, really researched. I had my lived experience, but still that did not prepare me for what was going to happen in these workshops, which it didn't. And it really took its toll mentally and emotionally. And the photographer Marina as well, and she described, I remember once, she goes, "Thahmina, you're like a detective, out little things," and you know, and that's what it's about, you know, them realizing something that they've said is golden to me, you know, in terms of what this project and what it needs. So I hope I've answered the question.
Absolutely, thank you so much. I'm going to move on to another question that's been put from one of our steering group, from Lucy Cunningham, and it's directed to you, Michelle, of alabamathireteen, which is, how have you found working with a working relationship with the gallery? You mentioned working with the art house whilst shielding, which is obviously a critical question of a kind of separation from the actual space, while at the same time being able, perhaps under very certain circumstances. How do you negotiate that one, being part of the world that is also something that is a dangerous place for you?
I did actually spend some time at the art house, and I was able to do that because I felt incredibly safe and supported to effectively keep shielding while I was there, as they have a very accessible space in terms of both my disability, but also having like a flat on site. The art house really is the only place I've ever been able to even consider doing a residency. I can't get into most art spaces. I use a wheelchair, and I often can't even get through the door of a lot of art institutions. But the main thing that really, really helped, made me feel safe there, was developing an access document with them that very, very clearly stated what my access needs were, and it was and it allowed a conversation to arise where we could talk. You know, it's obviously a very individual thing, and it was that focus on me and what my needs were, how they could be accommodated, that made me feel safe enough to be, you know, apart from 2 short periods over there, I have been effectively shielding since October 2019, because I'd actually just come out of hospital and I was only starting to sort of improve enough to, I do occasionally, you know, I go out, I have to make a lot of decisions if I want to go outside. It's like, you know, it's always a like balance of the gains and the losses that I will experience if I spend time with other people. And yeah, it was, yeah, basically the relationship that I was able to develop with them and having an access document that made that feel safe for me, essentially. And, you know, and I think that all organisations should encourage artists, and not just disabled artists, to look at access documents, and that they should become a really sort of standard commonplace thing. It's a great way to start your relationship with, you know, you feel like these people want to be a part of your art. They, you know, it's not, again, just tokenism.
Totally agree on the access documents. They're amazing. And they really, as a curator working with artists, they really allow you to form an intimacy and a trust quite early on. Yeah, they're amazing. And they also really help you leverage money if you're in the institution. You know, there's something about things on paper that need to be done that really helps to kind of unlock some funds.
Yeah.
So yeah, I recommend them for everyone.
I was thinking if we could possibly sort of expand that, because in terms of the conversation, people have talked about not only in sense forms of access and accessibility in terms of neurosensory and neuropsychologically diversity, which would mean that you're putting the burden on one person who is going to be different from others who needs to do. Whereas if you start with the baseline, which is how is the space going to be safe, hospitable, and welcoming, some of these other issues around class and around racial trauma and all these others will come into play, because these are psychologically damaging, they are exclusionary. And I think that's really one of the questions that's come up. What makes people feel this is a place I could go? Or what does the institution have to do not to make you conform to their model? It's like there's a doorway in, which is cut into a shape, which means, you know, mobility, money, confidence, experience feels like home. Whereas for many people, and one of the things I believe in passionately is what's in the galleries is not what makes people feel, oh, they're like me, right? And it seems my experience as a feminist, post-colonial queer feminist art historian has always been, which is the minute you say you need to think about people's identities, their sexualities, their physicalities, their social experiences and all the rest of it, then you're saying, okay, we're putting labels on things. But if you don't say, this wonderful friend of mine in Sweden who said, okay, how do you make the galleries accessible to queer people, right? It's not that you sort of put a certain kind of thing about, but you have to make sure you've collected enough work that if people are speaking out of that particular experience into that experience. And there was a wonderful one show that this woman did in Sweden, which was to show how wonderfully varied masculinities and femininities and sexualities had been over history. So look at Louis XIV, who has the most wonderful legs and has a taste in shoes. So that's a stereotype of some kind, etc. But it's already there, right? All these people are already there. Or, you know, what Lubena Himi did about saying, look, there are African presences in all sorts of art, right? And I'm going to shift the terms. I'm not just in service, I am actually the creative one. There's things we have to collect, put in place, and people will say, oh, I want to go there because I'll see something really like me. You know what I mean? But since, you know, that's why we want more women there as well. But I think that's a very important thing about an access document, which would make our museums not mirrors of a racist, classist, you know, heteronormative society, but actually locations where people would say, I feel at home there, I can walk in there, and I'm not frightened of this walking up the steps, going in, all this, you know, temple lights. So I think access is probably one of the critical things that come out of this, and that you have all said very firmly, we are here.
I think the only way that you can really do that is by involving those people in the conversations and the decision makings and the positions of power, you know, within those institutions. For me, it's, you know, someone could put on an exhibition about disability, and if every single person in that gallery and every single person who had made the decisions about that exhibition, if none of them were disabled, it means nothing to me, essentially, because you can only really understand, like, it's the importance of lived experience, and not just, I keep saying, like, talking about tokenism, but it's like, until people, you know, are actively, until there's more disabled curators, until there's more working class curators, until there's more Black curators, until there's, the heads of institutions, it's that balance of power, I think. Obviously there is lots of, things that people can do in the interim, but it's like having the, real genuine conversations with those, with the different groups of people, I think.
Well, thank you very much. That's a very, very good point to end on. We do have to stop, unfortunately, now, and I'm very sorry about that, because obviously these things get going. I have to thank Linsey very much for the attention and the care and the and since the deep openness to engage with these works that have been put into being because of the bursaries, but also to have the artists with us, because it's not a matter of objects which we are collecting. It is, as you say, life experiences that have led people to do this. And I'm so grateful to you for having applied to PANIC, and to the steering group for having selected you. This is such an exciting project that we need to find ways to carry on, and you need to be future leaders of this community that we're creating. So the network is definitely something that has brought us all together and made this conversation possible. So thank you to Abdullah, Thahmina, to alabamathireteen as your artist name, to Kevin, and particularly to all the Tetley staff behind it for organizing it, and above all to Linsey for linking from one of the great, Victorian institutions that bears this burdensome name of someone who made their money from sugar. I once confronted the Prince of Wales when he came to open the Tate Liverpool to say, you do realize that this is money that was made on the lives and deaths of millions of Africans. He looked very troubled, but we remember that, and we remember those lives that were lost and the heroicness of those lives in their defiance as well. But we are going to still have to fight to make our art environments hospitable, and we hope that the Tetley has been hospitable to you, but it is because of you that it is going to become even more of a place that sets us new challenges to sustain. So thank you, Linsey, for coming up from London via Zoom. Thank you all for being here. And thank you to the audience or the listeners. We didn't describe ourselves, but I hope through our voices, for those who haven't been able to see us, they've heard the passion and the commitment and the excitement of this project and these artists. So thank you very much. And I say good evening. Have a good evening after this.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.